Hello grade 4, it's Mr. Yahya, and today we're going to start a new quarter, our fourth quarter, and we will start with lesson 19. So this quarter we're only going to take grammar and vocabulary, so we're going to start with our grammar today, okay? And let's all open page 235 in our books, okay? So today we're going to start talking about clauses, okay? And what is a clause? Well, let's read over here and see. A clause is a group of words with a subject and predicate. If a clause can stand alone as a sentence, it is an independent clause. Okay, so if this clause can by itself be a sentence with a full meaning, then it's an independent clause. Okay, well, let's see the next kind of clause then. A dependent clause. So a dependent clause cannot stand alone. Many dependent clauses begin with a transition word such as before, after, since, because, who, whose, that, or which. Okay, so let's take a look at the example. Since they had no water for crops, they had to leave the ranch. So our dependent clause here is since they had no water for crops. By itself, it doesn't really mean much to us, right? We don't know exactly who is they, right? We don't know what's gonna happen if they don't have water, right? But here we have what? An independent clause, which is they had to leave the ranch. It's a full idea, a complete sentence, and it can stand alone. Let's look at another example. Here, Chavez was the leader that the workers chose. Okay, so here we have an independent clause here, which is Chavez was the leader, right? And the dependent clause that the workers chose. So here, Chavez was the leader. It can exist by itself, right? But that the workers chose, it's dependent. It cannot exist by itself or cannot stand alone, right? That the workers chose, what did the workers choose? Do we know? No, but if we say Chavez was the leader that the workers chose, now we do, right? So Chavez was the leader by itself can exist. Okay, well, let's look over here. Numbers 1 to 6. It says underline the dependent clause in each sentence. Circle the transition word that introduces the dependent clause. So, number 1. After they worked long hours, migrant workers had little to eat. What do you guys think is the independent clause, the one that can stand alone or can be a full sentence by itself? Yeah, migrant workers had little to eat. This here is the independent clause. Okay, so the dependent clause would be what? After they worked long hours. So we're going to underline after they worked long hours, okay? This here is going to be what? This is going to be our dependent clause, okay? So after they worked long hours is our what? Dependent clause. And what is the transition that introduces the dependent clause? After. Okay, so that before or after can be what? Transition words, right? So after they worked long hours is our dependent clause. Okay, number 2 we have workers who complained to the owners were fired, punished, or even killed. Okay, so workers who complained to the owners were fired, punished, or even killed. Okay, so here, what is our independent clause, the one that can stand by itself? workers were fired, punished, or even killed. That's the independent clause. And the dependent clause is what? Who complained to the owners? So, who complained to the owners is what is our dependent clause. Okay? And what is the transition over here? The word who. Okay? Who is the transition? Alrighty. There's number 3. We have the farm workers suffered because their work was so hard. So what is the independent clause, the one that can stand alone? The farm workers suffered. Okay, and what is the dependent clause? The dependent clause is because their work was so hard. So because is the transition, and their work was so hard cannot stand alone. Do we know who their work was? Who was they, right? No, we don't. Unless we have what? The farm workers. Ah, yeah, the farm workers. That's who they are. That's whose work was so hard, right? Okay. So we're going to choose because their work was so hard as our dependent clause, okay? Because their work was so hard, that's the dependent clause. Alrighty. Number 4. Until Chavez organized the workers, they had no way to fight back. So our independent clause here is they had no way to fight back. Our dependent clause is until Chavez organized the workers. This here is our dependent clause. Okay? Until Chavez organized the workers. Until is the transition. Okay? After the workers began to march, other people learned about their cause. Okay, so that's number 5. So what's the independent clause? Other people learned about their cause. That's the independent clause. So what's the dependent clause? Until Chavez organized the workers. Until is our transition. Okay, until Chavez organized the workers, that's the dependent clause. Do we know what happened until that happened? No, we don't. Okay, so we need the other part, which is they had no way to fight back. Okay. Number 6 over here. A huge cheering crowd met, well, let's do number 5 again. After the workers began to march, after here is what? The transition. Okay? So after the workers began to march is our dependent clause. And other people learned about their cause, that is our what? Independent clause. Okay, number 6. A huge cheering crowd met the marchers when they reached Sacramento. So, a huge cheering crowd met the marchers when they reached Sacramento. What do you guys think over here is our independent clause, the one that can stand alone or exist by itself? Yeah, it's going to be a huge cheering crowd met the marchers. A huge cheering crowd, right? That's our subject, right? And met the marchers is our predicate. And this here is a complete sentence that can exist by itself. Well, let's see the rest. When they reached Sacramento. Can that exist by itself? No, right? There's too much missing information or too much missing meaning, right? So, When they reached Sacramento, that will be our what? Dependent clause. And when is our transition. Okay, let's move on. Easy, right? Okay. Next, we're going to talk about relative and interrogative pronouns. Okay, so some dependent clauses begin with a relative pronoun, such as who, whom, whose, that, or which. We call all of these relative pronouns. These clauses act as adjectives and answer the questions, which one or what kind, about a noun or a pronoun. Interrogative pronouns introduce questions. What, who, and which are pronouns that ask questions, okay? So we have relative pronouns and we have interrogative pronouns. What are some relative pronouns? Well, let's write them down over here, okay? So we have relative pronouns, right? We have relative pronouns like, let's see, which words over here are relative pronouns? Let's take a look. We have who, whom, whose, that, or which. So let's write them down. Who, whom, right? Whose, and that, and which, right? Okay, let's see our interrogative pronouns. Okay. So which words here would be interrogative pronouns? Well, let's see. We have what, who, and which. Well, there's who over here and who over here. How do we know? You're going to know by the context of the sentence, okay? And we'll take some examples and see, okay? So we have who, what, and which as interrogative pronouns, right? What, who, and which, right? Because they're interrogative. They ask a question, okay? So let's see the examples. Our dependent clause, California is the state that produces the most fruit crops. So that here is our what? Relative pronoun. And it makes the dependent clause act like an adjective, which describes what? Describes the state of California, right? California is the state that produces the most fruit crops. That produces the most fruit crops. Okay? So this whole dependent clause that produces the most fruit crops describes what? Describes the state, right? It's an adjective that describes the state. So it tells us which state, right? Okay. Let's see. In a question, who will help me pick the crops today? Here, who, what is an interrogative pronoun. It asks a question, okay? So here, who will what introduce or ask a question. So here it says circle the interrogative or relative pronoun in each sentence. For sentences containing a relative pronoun, underline the dependent clause. Write the noun this clause describes on the line at the right. Let's see, let's do it together orally, okay? There was a terrible drought that caused the Chavez family to lose their ranch. So, what's going to be our relative or interrogative pronoun? That, right? So we're going to circle the word that. Okay? And what's the dependent clause? That caused the Chavez family to lose their ranch. So we're going to underline this whole clause. That caused the Chavez family to lose their ranch. And what is the noun that describes? It describes the drought. Okay? Which drought? The drought that caused the Chavez family to lose their ranch. Easy, right? Okay. Let's move on to number 2. They moved to California, which offered jobs for migrant farm workers. So, which clause here is our dependent clause? Which offered jobs for migrant farm workers, right? And which here is our what? Is our relative pronoun, right? We said that which is a relative pronoun. So, and what does which offer, or what does which here describe? It describes California, right? They moved to California, which offered jobs for migrant farm workers. So California offers jobs for migrant farm workers. So which here is what or relates to California. This whole dependent clause describes California. Okay, number 3. What jobs are the hardest to do? Oh, this here is a question, right? So we're going to be using what? An interrogative pronoun. And our interrogative pronoun is what? Okay? And what does what here describe? It describes what? The jobs, right? What jobs? What kind of jobs? So we're going to write on the line jobs, right? Alrighty. Number 4. Migrant children who move often have difficulty keeping up in school. So, migrant children have difficulty keeping up in school. That's the independent clause. Here we have who move often. That's our dependent clause, with who becoming what? Who is our relative pronoun. Okay? And it describes which word? The migrant children, right? Who move often. That's what? Describing the migrant children. Which migrant children? Or what kind of migrant children? The ones who move often. Okay, number 5. Which company opposed the strike? So we have what? A question. So we're looking for an interrogative pronoun, which is going to be which. Which is the interrogative pronoun. And it talks or describes which word? Company. Which company, right? We want to know which company opposed the strike. Alrighty. So that's page 236. Pretty easy, right? Alrighty. Okay. Next, we're going to talk about relative adverbs and clauses. Okay. So here, relative adverbs begin dependent clauses that tell where, when, or why. So we have here what? Relative adverbs, right? And they tell us when, where, or why, right? Alrighty. So, I can tell you why migrant workers loved Cesar Chavez. So why here is our relative adverb, and it tells us why, right? So I can tell you why migrant workers loved Cesar Chavez. Okay, California is the place where La Causa was born. So here we have what? The relative adverb where. And it reflects or describes what? California, right? California is the place where La Causa was born. So, where here relates to California. So it's a relative adverb. Okay, next we have, do you know when Chavez was born? Right? So when here is another relative adverb. Okay? So Chavez was born is the dependent clause, and when is the relative adverb. Alrighty. Let's see the questions over here from 1 to 6. It says underline the dependent clause in each sentence and circle the relative adverb that begins the clause. That Arizona ranch is where Chavez lived as a young boy. So we're going to underline where Chavez lived as a young boy. That's our dependent clause. And what is the relative adverb? Yeah, it's going to be where. So we're going to circle where. Okay, number 2. The family had to move away when a drought ruined the crops. So the family had to move away when a drought ruined the crops. When a drought ruined the crops is our what? Dependent clause, right? Yes, so when a drought ruined the crops, that's going to be our what? Dependent clause. Well, which word here is our relative adverb? That's going to be when. When is a relative adverb. Alrighty, let's move on. Number 3. Their sad mother told them why they had to leave their home. Their sad mother told them why they had to leave their home. What's our dependent clause? The dependent clause here is why they had to leave their home. Okay? And what's the relative adverb? Why, right? So we're going to circle why, and we're going to underline why they had to leave their home. Alrighty. Next we have number 4. The family had to live in a dirty shed when they arrived in California. So what's the dependent clause? When they arrived in California. So let's underline that. Okay. So when they arrived in California is our dependent clause. And which word here is the relative adverb? It's going to be when, right? It tells us when. So when they arrived in California. Excellent. Alrighty. Number 5. I wonder why the landowner treated workers so poorly. I wonder why the landowner treated workers so poorly. So our dependent clause here is why the landowner treated workers so poorly, right? And it is started by which relative adverb? Why. So we're going to circle why, and then we're going to underline why the landowner treated workers so poorly. Okay. Number 6, last one. An old theater in Fresno is where the first National Farm Workers meeting took place. So our dependent clause is where the first National Farm Workers meeting took place. And what is the relative adverb? Where. Okay? Easy? Easy peasy. Alrighty. So, that's it for today. Okay, I hope you studied these 3 pages well. If you have any questions, leave them in the comment section below, and I'll get back to you guys, okay? Enjoy the rest of your day. Bye-bye.